to another Quran study. God willing, we will be reading today from Surah 4, from the beginning of the Surah. Um, let's all seek refuge in God from Satan the rejected. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Surah 4, Al-Nisa. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. O people, observe your Lord, the one who created you from one being, and created from it its mate, then spread from the two many men and women. You shall regard you shall regard God by whom you swear, and regard the parents. God is watching over you. Regard the orphans. You shall hand over to the orphans their rightful properties. Do not substitute the bad for the good, and do not consume their properties by combining them with yours. This would be a gross injustice. So, the title of this surah is the women, and as we go along in this surah, you'll see that this surah consists of, comprehensive, straightforward laws that were set in place, in a very primitive society, starting, 1400 years ago, where, women were oppressed, and even now they continue to be oppressed. But these laws, if they're put in place in any society, there would be no oppression against women, and women's rights would be protected anywhere in the world. And these laws, obviously, are timeless. They would apply to women at any point in time and must be respected. Um, um, Starting with these two verses, God is telling us to observe Him, and observing God means to observe all the commandments that God has set in place. One thing to see here is that, I mean, I like the fact that when this surah starts with how God talks about creation, and it says that He created you from one being, and then created from it its mate, then spread from the two many men and women. So God is reminding us that, women obviously play a very essential role in our creation, given the fact that, if women were not created, obviously, the creation would not be multiplied, and that's how God has, brought us also. I mean, this plays an important role. I mean, people, consider in different societies, depending on their cultures and their dogmas, for example, in some religions and some cultures, women are considered the evil creatures. Even in traditional Islam, like there's hadiths about, hell being filled with a lot of women and just few men and stuff, couple, not that many men. And, what people say about Eve, for example, that Eve was the one who convinced Adam to, disobey God and come down to the earth, etc. So all of those are just lies. God has created men and women equal, and this surah, as we go along, continues to teach us that. And God tells us that, we should regard God and regard the parents. Regarding, so that's like regarding God as the first commandment, and regarding our parents is the second commandment. And it's very important for people to remember that, to um, not, disrespect the parents, to regard them, to honor them. Um, it's difficult for many people to observe God's commandments, but these are all for our own benefit. And our parents, have should have, I mean, our parents obviously play a major role in our lives, in raising us and nurturing us, and especially the mother, takes care of the children, and so it's important that we remember that, and we should remember that we have to regard our parents. It's God's second commandment. So, like before. doing anything else, you remember that you have to honor your parents and regard them, which is a, and it's a huge, I mean, it's a big commandment that, many people just take very lightly, especially in today's society, where, people are, constantly disrespecting their parents, and it's socially acceptable as well. But uh, but we have to remember that God is watching over us all the time, and a lot of times, and it's this that I think that's important, because a lot of times people will be nice to their parents when other people are around and other people are watching, and let's say you have guests and stuff like that, and people could be very nice to their parents, and then when the guests leave, then they just return to normal and start disrespecting them and yelling at them and stuff like that, and it's real. And God says that He's watching over us, and I mean, He's also, and we should observe Him. Obviously, uh, God's angels are recording everything. Now, I also like to read the footnote for this first verse. It says, "This is the second longest surah, and the title indicates that it aims at defending the women's rights. Any interpretation must favor the women's rights, not the other way around." So God, once again, I mean, God is all for protecting the rights of women. This surah is all about protecting the rights of women. So when people interpret these surahs, I mean, they have to remember, that women are always oppressed in any society, and we have to, respect their rights. So talking about feminism, a lot of people have issues with feminist ideas, but a lot of those ideas are very Quranic ideas about equal rights for men and women. Um, so moving on to verse 3, grounds for polygamy. If you deem it best for the orphans, you may marry you may marry their mothers. You may marry two, three, or four. If you fear lest you become unfair, then you shall be content with only one, or with what you already have. Additionally, you are thus more likely to avoid financial hardship. Okay, I think each one of these series, verses require, I guess, some explanation. So, actually forgot to, touch on verse 2 for the rightful properties of the orphans. Um, so for the orphans, we have to be very mindful that, we have to regard orphans. Obviously, orphans are uh, people who need to be taken care of, because they just like any other people, but especially because they don't have their parents. And being orphan doesn't necessarily mean that you lose both your parents. If just even one of your parents, like like your father, is out of your life completely, then and you're not getting any support from them. um, and obviously, you're not like old, you're like maybe young, that way, when you need your parents and they're not around, like a father, your father's not around, you're, let's say, 5 years old and father's missing, you're considered an orphan. He doesn't necessarily have to be dead. So considering that fact, there's many orphans around us. There are many orphans, and so God says you have to regard them. And so a lot of times when you have these situations, you may be in circumstances where you have properties with them. Uh, let's say they might have um, some properties that you're combining or something like that, and so you have to be mindful that you do not consume their properties. Their properties are just there, uh, uh, for you to protect them, so that when they're older and mature, you can hand them over. So that's their rightful property. But a lot of people will abuse that, obviously, and God is protecting against that. And going to polygamy, I mean, this is probably one of the most abused verses against women in the Quran. And It says for the footnote. It says see Appendix 30 for a detailed discussion of polygamy. So, God willing, let's go on to Appendix 30 for polygamy because it is important. Um, okay. So it says Appendix 30. I'm on page 477. Appendix 30 is polygamy. It says polygamy was a way of life until the Quran was revealed 1400 years ago. Um, so polygamy, just for those who are not familiar with the term, means for a man to marry more than one wife. That's polygamy. So polygamy was a way of life until the Quran was revealed 1400 years ago. When the earth was young and underpopulated, polygamy was one way of populating it and bringing in the human beings needed to carry out God's plan. By the time the Quran was revealed, the world had been sufficiently populated, and the Quran put down the first limitations against polygamy. Polygamy is permitted in the Quran, but under strictly observed circumstances. Any abuse of this divine permission incurs severe retribution. Thus, although polygamy is permitted by God, it behooves us to examine our circumstances carefully before saying that a particular particular polygamous relationship is permissible. Um, our perfect example here is the Prophet Muhammad. He was married to one wife, Khadija, until she died. He had all his children except one from Khadija. Thus, she and her children enjoyed the Prophet's full attention for as long as he was married to him, 25 years. For all practical purposes, Muhammad had one wife. From age 25 to age 50. During the remaining 13 years of his life, he married the aged widows of his friends, who left many children. The children needed a complete home with a fatherly figure, and the Prophet provided that. Providing a fatherly figure for orphans is the only specific circumstance in support of polygamy mentioned in the Quran 4:3. I'm going to repeat that statement again. It says, providing a fatherly figure for orphans is the only specific circumstance in support of polygamy mentioned in the Quran. Surah 4, verse 3. Other than marrying widowed mothers of orphans, there were three political marriages in the Prophet's life. His close friends Abu Bakr and Omar insisted that he marry their daughters, Aisha and Hafsa, to establish traditional family ties among them. The third marriage was to Maria, the Egyptian. She was given to him as a political gesture of friendship from the ruler of Egypt. This perfect example tells us that a man must give his full attention and loyalty in marriage to his wife and children in order to raise a happy and wholesome life. Um, the Quran emphasizes the limitations against polygamy in very strong words. If you fear less, you may not be perfectly equitable in treating more than one wife, then you shall be content with one. 4:3. You cannot be equitable in a polygamous relationship no matter how hard you try. That's Surah 4, verse 129. Okay. And God willing, I'm going to read 4 129 as well. Uh, okay. Which says that if you cannot be equitable with more than one wife, you shall be content with only one. Did I get the verse right? 4 129, yes. So it says polygamy discouraged. You can never be equitable in dealing with more than one wife, no matter how hard you try. Therefore, do not be biased as to leave one of them hanging, neither enjoying marriage nor love to marry someone else. If you correct the situation um, and maintain righteousness, God is forgiver, most merciful. So basically, that's what the Quran says. The Quranic limitations against polygamy point out the possibility of abusing God's law. Therefore, unless we're absolutely sure that God's law will not be abused, we had better resist our lust and stay away from polygamy. If the circumstances do not dictate polygamy, we had better give our full attention to one wife and one set of children. The children's psychological and social well being, especially in countries where polygamy is prohibited, almost invariably dictate monogamy. A few basic criteria must be observed in contemplating polygamy. One, it must alleviate pain and suffering and not cause any pain or suffering. If you have a young family, it is almost certain that polygamy is an abuse. Polygamy, to substitute a younger wife, is an abuse of God's law. 4:19. Okay, so God willing, I will stop here for now, and we can have discussion, comments, questions. Guys, if you have comments or questions, about these verses, especially about polygamy, or yeah, polygamy especially, I think is something. I mean, these things that we read, I think are quite significant, and always, most people disregard them.
Yeah, mashallah, this polygamy is abused big time in our culture, misrepresented. You're right about that, and there's a very, very, very specific reason to do that, and it's only allowed it to if there's orphan and their father have died and just the mother to support the family, and we see that problem big time. People go out and marry, replace young if they don't, if there's no love in between husband and wife, and or there are some problems, they will, you know, escape, want to escape from those problems and just go out and do and many other reasons for financial reasons. So these are all breaking God's commandment. And it's very, very, very clear. It's not being biased reading from the Final Testament that it says that. Even if you read that regular translation, it's very much says the same thing. But people don't want to read the Quran, and they want to go out and ask other translations from those hadiths and other books that just completely 180 translation of the Quran, where they allow them and making men as this and that and degrading the women. Uh, I mean, pretty much every culture you see in the system. In 80s, the women were degraded to the point where if the husband dies, they burn the body of the live wife. That's they used to do that. That's an Islamic culture. And in Christianity, they say the birth of punishment is the consequences of Eve provoking Adam to eat that from the tree. That's the punishment of women. I mean, there's all sort of things going on in the world, and we need to stop because God says in the last study that we did in Surah 3 that we are created equally. There's no difference between male and female. So this is very serious to God, and we should not avoid that, mashallah. And inshallah, I'll say one more thing that the footnote for 4:1 and how it says that all the interpretations must be favor for the rights of women, and that's what is focused on this surah. Similarly, if you read the Quran, uh, whenever when you translate or explain some story or anything, there has to be a center point, and we have to focus on the center point. That's the only way we can translate the story as the writer intended for us, right? uh, the Quran, when God sent the Quran to us, this final testament, the only focus was that there is only one God. That was the focus. So, in that light of that, when you translate the Quran, all the verses have to be translated in the light of the God is one. Our Lord is one. That is one light. And when you keep that in focus and you translate the whole Quran, you can never go wrong. And that's how, mashallah, we see the final testament has been translated with the light of when each verse you read and you translate it with focusing the messages that's the message has to be contained. We should not go away from that message. And the mashallah, we see the translation is so awesome that it does when the translator with the help of God translated it backs up very very nicely, mashallah.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys remember, we had this one person before that had joined our discussions, and then later we realized that, he was like full-blown polygamist, and how he was, completely prevented from accepting, any of these teachings, and how, he made himself believe this idea that, he could have like hundreds of, even thousands of wives, even though, God has these verses in place for women's protection. He had such an skewed perception, and God knows, how many people, and that's for somebody who has been reading, this Quran, even with everything for protection of women, like, coming up with these types of ideas. And imagine like all the perverts, I like to say, that have been reading the other translations and stuff. What kind of ideas they have, about women, and how they live. And we can see that, how they abuse these women. It's just every story I hear, it just blows my mind, how they abuse women and use religion to justify it, especially, using, obviously, they're all using the Quran to justify polygamy itself, and then on top of that, the ones that use hadiths on top of it is just even worse. And yeah, most of them don't do it for anything other than lust. They like to have multiple women, in just in abuse God's law, basically, because God's purpose is for you to have one mate. And this example that we see of Muhammad was like so obvious. He for 25 years, he just had one wife. Most of his children were from that wife, and he had a fulfilling life with just one family. And I think one thing we also see from these verses is very important for a family to, to have a father figure, for the father to be around the family and to give the family time. And obviously, when you have multiple wives, you're the moment you have one wife, your time's going to be divided by half, and that even half you can't do, right? You end up giving more to one and less to the other, and it's unless you carry like a stopwatch with you all the time. Even then you can't, uh, be most equitable. Obviously, the age, your financial resources. Your financial resources get divided. And everything, your attention, everything. And obviously, for the most part, it's just hurts the women. And a lot of times people do it to hurt the spouse. The spouse is always hurt when they go and substitute a younger wife for an older wife. And this always causes pain to the family members of the family of the person who goes and enters into a polygamous relationship. So obviously, having four wives is just so acceptable in the Muhammadan culture, that no one seems to question it. And the people who are considered most righteous, in the Muhammadan, culture. I mean, religion. I mean, they have four wives. Most of them have like two wives at least. um, I mean, in their circle, it's very acceptable, right? So they have two wives. Some have more. But thank God. I mean, America is, a more submitted nation than any other country in the world, and here and most Western civilized countries, we have a law that you can only have one wife. So
Yeah,
uh,
mashallah. These
yeah,
countries are
mashallah.
more close to
Hmm.
righteousness law wise
Hmm.
than actually they follow a lot of Quranic laws, like the welfare system, and especially certain countries are so good at that, the old age and taking care of the elderly. Like we have such a good system in Canada here. I don't know about US.
You can have as many girlfriends you want, but not wives.
Yeah, no, people.
Hmm.
I see the polygamy thing is so clear here and highly abused. Hearsay, of course, or abuse of the chronic um, authorization of in what situation. And the irony is that they will have other wives, but not the women who get divorced or they have no husband in their life or the husband died and they have children, they would barely get married again. Those are the one you're supposed to be providing because in olden times women fine, a lot of women work now, but we're talking about a certain percentage in certain countries where women are completely, it's in impoverished areas and all that. And if there is no husband in the life of children and all that, they're just sitting there. And these people will have other reasons to remarry, or, oh, my wife didn't have a child, I'm going to bring another wife, or she didn't have a son, just making excuses. Or just the other day, I saw a person married to two brides were sitting one on the left, one on the right at the same time. What the heck is that? That is so sick. Anyway, so yeah.
I think those women were also sick. Those who were agreed to marry at the same time, with one man. It's their mistake too. God gave them the brain, but that's their choice. They choose to.
Yeah, the women, like mostly in those countries, women don't have a lot of say in the marriage, but it's such a taboo, the parents' pressure or whatever. But still, yeah, you're right that like take a stand. God told you to, stand up for your rights. And why
Mm.
would they just happily going in such a marriage? Like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
Also about the polygamy is the these people, they use them as a trophy. An older person will marry a young one, and I've seen pictures of sitting on the stage an older man and getting married with in someone in their 20s, and they put their pictures, and yeah, I got it. I mean, they're treated like a trophy. It's so bad.
Hmm.
uh, their practice. God goes down to the roots of the cause. God does not just cure, like you have a disease like blood pressure. God will not just give you, like, take a medicine. God will take us to the root of the cause. So it doesn't even arise to the level that God says that don't stare at women. And now, if you examine this verse, like if you're in public and if you obey this principle, that the law of God, that I should not stare. So what happens is that the lust will prevent in your heart. You will not look at the women. You will. I'm not talking about, if you take it just that verse, and if there's a lady speaking on the stage and and you say, oh, I'm not supposed to look at the lady. God said, no, you have to look at the understanding why God says do not stare, because you're staring for the wrong reason. that's going to cause a lot of problem. You know, the lady will think that will feel comfortable, like, you know, if there's someone sitting and somebody, a guy is staring at you, I mean, you will feel uncomfortable. So God doesn't want her to feel comfortable, uncomfortable, and God doesn't want you to look at and protect yourself. At the same time, there's other people present. They're gonna look at you, that you claim to be a submitter, and but you're looking at women, and then gonna say, "Oh, look at that man. He acts as righteous, but look at he's staring at women." And you know, there's so many problems can arise. And then the woman, if she has a bad intentions and she sees you looking at her, she can come to you and start talking to you, and then that can lead into a problem. So God is trying to prevent all these problems from even coming to surface, and God says, "Stop, don't do that." You know, mashallah, how God protects us.
Yeah, that's right. I remember somebody had told me that, they believe, some of them believe that about staring at the women, they're saying that you can look at them, you can stare at them for as long as you want, but don't, like, it's not just once you blink or, you turn your head away, like, then you can't look. So if you just see them
That's
and
so
you
funny.
stop blinking and just look at them, it's
Yeah,
okay.
they keep their eyes open with their hands. Right, the tears coming in the eye, but I must not blink. This is all nonsense. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess if there's no more comments, I can continue reading. Okay, so um, God willing, we'll start with verse 5. No, 4. It says, "You shall give the women their due dowries equitably. If they willingly forfeit anything, then you may accept it. It is rightfully yours." So this part, obviously, it's important for us to know that, one of the requirements for marriage is the women's dowry. And this is a very important thing. It's one of the requirements of marriage, meaning if you don't give the women their dowry, you can't marry them. If you don't have money to, pay for dowry, I mean, for a woman, I mean, you should wait until you're able to have money to give dowry. I mean, dowry, again, is for the security of women, for the protection of women, I mean, people can end up marrying someone, take them from their home and end up marrying them, and then, you know, um, and then for whatever reason, they decide to divorce them. In that case, I mean, the women needs to have some kind of security, some kind of protection, because um, that woman is not the same woman that was there before marriage. Now she's been married and she might have even kids. She might have to look after her, and it might be difficult for her to get married too. And so for her to, it's there for her security, for her to be able to support herself in case there is a divorce, for example, and that's her right to have that, whether the divorce happens or not. But God has put that as her right. I mean, that as her money that you give to her when you get married. Of course, now, it goes without saying that, if you are supposed to set a dowry for the women, it has to be a substantial amount of money that's enough for her to look after herself, like at least for about a year or so, to for her to be able to support herself. So what we see in again in the Muhammadan Islam, people giving dowry like nominal amounts like $10 or $5, or less. I mean, usually it's like the same amount that they give to the person who's there to oversee the marriage ceremony for the couple. So like it's if they get like the imam of a masjid or whatever, they give them pretty much the same amount of money that they're setting as dowry for the women too. Like I think you guys remember last time I was talking about polygamy. I mean, last time I was talking about dowry, I saw this elaborate wedding on YouTube with, people having like, you know, tens of, flashy sports cars and, drone footage of, elaborate wedding with, I mean, huge crowds, in Europe and stuff. And then, when it came to the dowry, it was like 100 pounds or something, they said as a dowry of the woman. I mean, 100 pounds she's probably going to spend in a day or a week, you know, at the most, So that is total abuse of God's law. I mean, it has to be, God says you have to give dowry equitably. And so, of course, it has to be in accordance with what the husband can afford, but at the same time, it has to be, based on, something that, she can live off on for at least certain amount of time, like maybe a year or so, to be able to support herself. Um, and but usually what ends up happening is, instead of that, I mean, obviously, in some of these cultures, I mean, the dowry is almost non-existent, like this is not dowry, there's, so it's safe to say, like, there's pretty much no dowry for the women, and on the other side, in most cultures, like especially in South Asia, for example, in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and these countries, women are supposed to bring significant amounts I mean, of like material, money, appliances, uh, lots of stuff,
Yeah,
they're
they
supposed
call
to
that
bring.
dowry.
Yeah, exactly. And so, that's why when people have daughters, I mean, they have to save their whole life, to pay for, all of that, and to collect money so they can provide that. And women who do not bring this kind of dowry for the husband and their family, usually are treated very badly in throughout their lives. Some of them, I was seeing, like, sometimes, they're burnt alive and stuff like that, even, it's ridiculous. Um, but but the system where God is, looking out for the women and protecting the women, women are the one who are supposed to be provided for, obviously, because they might have spent their whole, I mean, there might even be women who are educated, independent, and but once, they enter into marriage, and they have responsibilities with children and family and all that, I mean, a lot of women, stop working, especially when they start having kids, and giving them time and attention, it needs nurturing, it needs time. And so, a lot of women may stop working, and they might not be, even to the in modern societies, and so they have to look after them also. And then also, it's not just for financial reasons, I mean, it's there for their security, like, um, it's for various, other reasons, and it's God's wisdom that, He has put that in place also to make it difficult for people, to just go and marry someone, and then, a drop of a hat, go and find another one. You have to, when you have to give this security, it acts as a deterrent for you to go around and, start marrying and divorcing multiple women. It's not like dating, obviously, so there's substantial amount of commitment involved. And when you're giving your dowry, I mean, you're ensuring that commitment, that you're committed. It's like, I mean, it's not like I'm trying to compare, having a wife to having property, but like, for example, when you go and you go and apply for a loan, for example, for a substantial amount of loan, they ask for down payment, which means that, halfway through this thing, I mean, people can back out, and when they don't have, substantial amount of money invested, they can always back out. And so as a security, you put down a deposit, in case there's damages or things like that, the money, they use that money. Or let's say if you're just getting loan, you put a significant amount of money as deposit, as a security that, that is there to ensure the bank that you're not going to back out, because if you do, that amount is not going to be refunded to you. So this makes it difficult for them to just go and take it from one institution and then If they don't like it, they just stop paying and then go to another one. Act as a deterrent for that as well. At the same time, it ensures for the other party that if they back out and if they're they have any problems, that this money will act as a blanket to cover for those things. So likewise, I mean, this is a security for the women. The women are not the same as they were from before you married them, and for them it should be good enough for to provide for the woman for some time, um, until she can figure out what she can do for her survival. um, and then God says, if they willingly forfeit anything, you may accept it as rightfully yours. I mean, there could be women who are very wealthy, and or whatever the circumstances might be, and they might decide that they don't want some of it, and they could forfeit it. But they cannot forfeit dowry altogether. They can make adjustments to the dowry. I mean, once the dowry has been set, you can make adjustments to it. So they can forfeit part of it, and just not take it. And only in those cases, God says it is rightfully yours. Verse 5. I only have 5 minutes left. Verse 5 says, do not give immature orphans the properties that God has entrusted with you as guardians. You shall provide for them therefrom, and clothe them and treat them kindly. You shall test the orphans when they reach puberty. As soon as you find them mature enough, give them their properties. Do not consume it extravagantly in a hurry before they grow up. The rich guardian shall not charge any wage, but the poor guardian may charge equitably. When you give them their properties, you shall have witnesses. God suffices as reckoner. So here, I mean, as I was saying earlier, you might have orphans that you may have to look after. Either there are they're basically they could be your own, like, stepchildren, for example, that you have some of their properties that you're looking after, or that you could have married a widow, for example, and she may have orphans, so you're combining them. Or you could be a relative. Let's say you have a brother or someone who died, and then you end up taking care of the children, and so you're taking care of their properties. So in those types of circumstances, of course, I mean, or you could even have adopted kids, and they could have some properties of their own, and you may have to look after that as well. And so in those cases, God says that you shall not give it to them while they're immature, because if they're immature and you give it to them, obviously they're just going to spend it on something silly because they don't have sense of responsibility at that time. They're not mentally mature enough to make sound decisions. They're still constantly growing, and so until they reach puberty, you cannot give them their properties. Once they reach puberty, then which is like for guys 13, or and I think like 12 or so for women. I mean, depending. Um, and and so at that point in time, you can test them. If you find them, responsible enough. Some kids can be responsible at a younger age. So if you find them responsible enough, you can give them. But for some, it takes time. If you see them, doing things that are immature, then you should not give them their dowries until they're mature. I mean, their sorry, their properties until they're mature. And God says, do not consume it extravagantly in a hurry before they grow up. So obviously, you're using their dowry to clothe them and provide for them, and so also you have to treat them kindly. You have to treat them as family, as you treat your own family. And so, like, you have to be kind and everything. And then at the same time, also, God says, as soon as you find them mature, give enough, give them their property. So it's not like, oh, you make it, you set the bar really high that you're trying to delay it so you can consume it, while as they're growing. No, you, as soon as you find them mature enough, you just give it to them. God says, and do not consume it extravagantly in a hurry. So, like, some people would be doing it in a hurry, like, let me just consume it extravagantly quickly so that before they're mature, I can get the most out of it, or all of it, even in some cases. So God says, don't do that. And then it says, the rich guardian shall not charge any wage, but the poor guardian may charge equitably. So if you're already rich and you have your own resources, you don't charge a wage for taking care of them. Basically, you take care of them yourself and then give them their property. But if you're poor and you have their property, you can just take from the property and uh, some of it as a fee for taking care of them. Like for example, um, like in some societies, the government, for example, provides a wage for people to take care of orphans, and so they get monthly payments, for example, to look after the kids. So in the same manner, like if you have orphans and they have properties, you can take some money from that if you're poor, uh, as a wage to look after them. But if you're rich, God says don't do that. So um, and God says, when you give them their properties, you shall have witnesses. God suffices as a reckoner. So it's very important that when you do give them their properties, that that is a financial transaction also, and it has to be witnessed. So there must be witnesses present during that time to make sure that they're there in case something happens in the future, that there's a claim that the properties were not given to us or something, that you have witnesses that can testify that those properties were given to these orphans when they reached maturity. And then God says he suffices as a reckoner. So God obviously, reckons everything. We must remember that. As we deal with issue of giving people their rights and being equitable and being honest in these situations. I mean, God is the one who is recording everything. And so with that, I will end. And if you guys have any comments or questions, feel free.
Mashallah. Great study. Praise God.
Yeah, inshallah, praise God. We only did 6 verses today, but they are heavy verses,
Yeah, there's a
so
lot
it's
of
time to go over.
material.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is better that we read and discuss. Doesn't matter. We don't have to rush the Quran. And yeah, it's more understanding. Yeah, imagine the whole surah. I think, isn't it the second largest surah of the Quran, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And mashallah, that how Messenger of the Covenant had, stated that this should be considered in women's favor. This is this surah is because women were treated very badly, and secondary level as a human being. Um, like they still, in certain cultures and certain Islamic countries, really they're considered less than a human being. And also something from Quran, another distortion regarding women, the witnessing part, right? They have made it like, okay, two women are equal to one man, okay, because of that testimony, if there is a financial transaction or something, right? Regarding a witness for a particular transaction, so they don't become if one becomes biased. But they also have distorted that to disadvantage women, and saying that, look, God says they're equal to, two women are equal to one man. So they're already like a 50% of a human being or something. And this surah tells us about the very, mashallah, obviously, subhanallah, God already knows that, how these women have been abused in the past and still in the future. So if a righteous person could just understand all these revelations and how women's rights are protected, they would not dare, going against God's laws. But my goodness, have they ever abused Quranic verses or used instead basis hadith?
Yeah, mashallah. Like you say, having two women as a witness, from that part they take out that okay, they're equal to one man is equal to two women, but they miss the other parts where God is clearly saying. I think at least a couple of places God says that you are all equal. Men and women are equal. So that is clear statement from God that we are equal, whether men and our responsibilities may be different. As a man is more, God made them more stronger. They go out and work, and women are more like nurture and motherly love, so they can raise the kids. So, but other than that, we are equal in God's eyes, mashallah. So, mashallah. So I'll say that this start off by God saying that verse 1 that regard God. So when you regard God, um, all the things that we're going to read in this verse is keeping God, we're regarding God. Because why regarding God? Because God says He's watching over us. He's watching what we're doing. Our intentions, our most innermost thoughts and intentions are being watched precisely. We cannot cheat in any way. So, like for example, any verse that you read, like 4:6, then you shall test the orphans. So when you suppose you responsible for some orphans, like your brother died and he left a couple of kids and you take over. He had a shop that he was running, so now you're responsible for the shop. So you have to make everything keeping God in your mind that I don't cheat in any way, or anything that I do is not, I'm not cheating these kids because God is watching me. My intentions have to be exact and pure, that these kids won't suffer. If whatever the property you have, uh, like if you test the orphans, you want to be very, very honest that yes, whether they are okay to take over the property. Like if they're one of the kid can run the shop, I can hand over the shop to him, or not. Or you want, even though you think, even though they pass the test, that they're mature enough, but you try to wiggle around and say, no, I don't think in my opinion, he doesn't. I don't feel like. But you saw that this kid is very smart, intelligent, and he can handle this his shop, his dad's shop. But you purposely hide it, and then so you can take part of ownership of that shop for a long time, so you can gain benefit. So anything that we do, whether that will be taking care of the orphans or getting married a second time or whatever we're doing, God says regard God, because our intentions, He knows our intentions. We cannot cheat God. So we have to be very careful. We become extremely honest in this part, that test ourselves again and again. Before we testing orphan, we should test ourselves that that we don't make any mistakes, because we will have to report on the day of judgment. God says that person was ready to take the property, or why did you marry, why did you cheat, or this and that. Everything to the down to the size of an atom will not be unseen. MashaAllah, praise God. Another small comment that the one of the misunderstanding in the traditional Islam is that dowry has to, you can give dowry anytime in the future, or most of the time they talk about dowry when they get divorced. At that time they said, okay, you know, you have to give that amount of dowry. But Quran is very clear that dowry has to be given before you start the relationship, before you know, right before you do that anything, not when getting divorced. And that is a very, very serious issue. I mean, when I was married when we were traditional Islam, and then I went and look at the transaction, what was said in that nikah nama, you know, and I calculated, and if me and my wife figured out that it was paid less, supposed to be what was written on that one. That was a burden on me for so many years, and mashallah, that we tried, you know, to balance the whatever the difference was. So it has to be given before you know, have any relationship with them. I mean, sleep or something.
MashaAllah. Anyone else who hasn't spoken for the last 2 years? No, I'm just kidding. um,
Speak now or forever hold your peace.
mhm, yeah. Huda, you like to say something?
Talk about the weather.
Mm, okay. All right. So I guess, are there any other comments or questions? Oh, okay. She's in the kitchen. All right. Okay. So yeah, thank you all for joining us. God willing, our next study is going to be on Tuesday at 2:30 p.m. Pacific time, and God willing, our teacher is going to be Nudot.
I think so.
Okay,
Inshallah.
inshallah, inshallah. Okay, thank you all. Assalamu alaikum.